Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second part of relative clauses lesson, where we will discuss non-defining relative clauses. As the outline shows, we will shed light on their characteristics and then another related type of clause called connective clauses. To show the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses, we need to resort to punctuation. After that, discuss punctuation, that's what I mean. After that, we will introduce another type of relative clause, which is the reduced clause. And we will also discuss the zero relative clause and highlight the differences between the similarities and differences between these two types of clauses. Last but not least is the prepositional relative clause, where we look at the different positions of a preposition in a relative clause and how it impacts our style. Now, unlike defining clause or a defining clause which specifies the noun or noun phrase that precedes it, the non-defining clause, which is also called describing, parenthetical, non-essential, non-restrictive, only describes this noun by providing extra information. That is, the information that is included in the non-defining clause is not really essential. Okay? Concerning the relative pronoun that had this type of clause, as you may be aware of, they are the same as those used in the defining clause, namely who for people in subject position which becomes whom in object position, which on the other hand is used for animals, things, and or objects. As you can tell from this example where the relative clauses, I should say, in red all add extra information about Dr. Smith in the first and the second example. Likewise, in the third and fourth examples, the relative clauses provide extra information about the journal in example 3 and the April issue in example 4. For more clarification, you have these three examples where in one, the relative clause which is not air conditioned simply tells us more information about Anne's office. It doesn't tell us in which office she spent the afternoon. That has been defined already by the personal pronoun her. The same holds true for examples 2 and 3 respectively. Now that you know what a non-defining clause is and how it functions, we will revisit the differences between a defining and a non-defining relative clause. As you must see, or you must have noticed from the preceding examples, all non-defining relative clauses are preceded by a comma or two, depending on whether the relative clause is in the middle or at the end of the sentence. However, the defining clause is never, and I stress here, never preceded by a comma. Okay, so again, to make the idea clearer, consider these two examples. The soldier who had gold stripes on his uniform seemed to be the most important, and in this example, the relative clause is essential to the identification of the soldier in question. That is, without this information that is communicated by the relative clause, we will be unable to identify the important soldiers. Unlike the second example where the relative clauses who played in the World Camp, which kept him out of the Five Nations Championship, can be deleted without altering the meaning of the sentence, and which is the tour was weakened when Golden Hamilton withdrew yesterday because of a back injury. What should be retained is that a non-defining clause can be deleted without changing the meaning. The same can be said about the connective clause, which is just another type of non-defining relative clause. It should be noted here that a non-defining clause can add extra information to describe the noun or noun phrase, as in, say, my neighbor, who is very old, is a very nice person, or it can serve to develop the story as per the example, he offered to help me, which was very kind of him. In this case, the clause is called connective because it adds information to the main clause. And here is a brief summary of the main points related to the difference between defining, non-defining, and essential clauses. As you can see for yourself, you have here examples and explanations that should help you better understand the differences between these two types of clauses. Another important point worth stressing with respect to the difference between the two types of clauses, defining and non-defining, that is punctuation. So while punctuation is not required for a defining clause, remember, like I said earlier, it is mandatory for the non-defining and connective clauses. Look at these examples. This example, rather. The woman who is sitting next to me wants to ask a question. In this sentence, the clause who is sitting next to me identifies a particular woman, the one sitting next to me, and functions as a restrictive relative clause that specifies the woman in question, and thus the information is essential and cannot be set off the head or separated from the head noun by a comma. However, when the information is additional, as is the case for this example, George Washington, comma, who was the first president of the United States, comma, is a symbol of honesty, bravery, and patriotism. I can't say the word patriotism. In this sentence, George Washington is a proper noun identified by name, and the relative clause, who was the first president of the United States, adds additional information that is not essential to the meaning of the sentence. As a non-restrictive relative clause, it is separated from the main noun with commas. In essence, punctuation shows that the information is optional. Okay? Now, the ball is in your court, like we say. You need to practice the difference between types of clauses by punctuating this passage. Make sure to post your answers in the comment section or upload them to the platform for feedback on your progress. So far, we've talked about relative clauses, their types, and how punctuation can help us tell us which is which. Now we will survey prepositions. As you can see from the chart, in formal style, the preposition precedes the noun, but can also come later in the relative clause. Note that the relative pronoun that cannot be preceded by a preposition or comma. Okay? The paper to that he referred, that's wrong. Or the man to that he talked. Rather, it should be the paper to which he referred or the man to whom he talked. Does that tell you something about defining versus non-defining? I think it should. Consider these examples for more details on where to place a preposition. These are the examples according to two different styles, formal and casual or everyday English. So you can hear, I have here many examples with the different types of prepositions that should help you with the placement of preposition when you are writing and when you are speaking. A final note about prepositions and the relative pronoun that, which can only be used when the preposition comes after the verb, as per these examples. Can I meet the person that you talked to? Can we find the hotel that you stayed in? And here we call it stranded because the preposition always occurs or is placed at the end of the question. The last point that we need to clarify relates to the behavior of some relative pronouns like who, which, and that. When a relative pronoun is followed by a form of the verb be, example is, was, has been, we often leave out both the pronoun and this part of the verb. The result is a non-finite verbless or participle clause. Consider sentences number 1 through 5. From I told you about the woman who lives next door to we don't speak to the people who are living in the cottages. Okay, I'll give you some time to go through them. So, what do you notice in these sentences? What is common among them? Yes, it is the relative pronouns are all in subject position. However, some have the verb be and others don't, but it is possible to drop the relative pronoun in all of these sentences, which will result in a verbless clause. This is referred to as the reduced relative clause. This type of relative clause, which lacks a relative adverb or pronoun, is called reduced. And I think you understand now why we call it reduced, because it doesn't have a relative pronoun. A quick distinction is in order here. Reduced relative clauses and zero relative between reduced relative clauses and zero relative clauses, like I said at the very beginning. In both cases, the pronoun can be deleted, but in the zero relative clause, the verb is maintained, as you can see from example number 6. This is the car that or which I want. And when I reduce, I delete rather the pronoun, I get this is the car that I want. Here we have a verb, but if you compare 6 with the other examples 1 through 5, whenever we delete the relative pronoun, we either have a past participle like the house broken into last week has been boarded up. No verb here. Okay, the same for do you see the cat lying on the roof, and so on and so forth. I hope that this distinction is helps you or makes the difference between reduced and relative clauses clear, because sometimes we are inclined to delete the relative pronoun, and it's very important to know when to delete it and when not to delete it, right? And here finally, to close this lesson, you have a summary in the form of a tree diagram that shows the main relative clauses and the pronouns that go with them, and also some interactive activities to tease your brain. Here you have a riddle, and all you have to do is click on this link and go to the website to check your understanding of relative clauses by doing this riddle. And this activity is a chance for you to practice relative pronouns in context. Do not hesitate to paste your answers on the comment block. We'll be more than happy to get back to you with our feedback. And the last activity, on the other hand, aims to promote your productive skills and use relative clauses in an authentic way. So I'm speaking namely about this activity, okay? So don't hesitate to post your arguments in the comments blog, and good luck to everyone.